All right, strap in, everybody. We're going deep today, going way beyond the fairy tale swamp. We're talking Shrek.
Shrek.
Yeah, Shrek, but not just the funny ogre, you know.
Uh-huh.
This deep dive is going to get a little, well, philosophical, maybe even a little theological.
Okay, now I'm intrigued.
Yeah. So the podcast transcript we're looking at today takes Shrek very seriously, like potential deity level serious.
Seriously, like Shrek as a god.
You heard right. It's a lot.
I bet. So how does this podcast even start to make that case?
So the podcast analyzes Shrek through a bunch of different lenses, right? Mythology, philosophy, even religious symbolism.
Lots to unpack there.
It is.
Yeah.
But the whole idea, it seems to be that Shrek embodies something bigger, something more than just a funny ogre.
Okay, I'm starting to see where this is going. So how does Shrek become this symbol of something bigger?
Well, they start with the hero's journey, that classic storytelling structure.
Yeah, the hero goes on a quest, faces challenges, and comes out transformed.
Exactly. But the podcast argues that Shrek doesn't just follow this structure. He, it embodies it in a way that elevates him.
Elevates him how?
He's like a protector, a protector of those who don't fit in, a challenger of norms.
Okay, I see that. He definitely doesn't fit the typical hero mold.
Exactly. And that's where the swamp comes in, right?
Yeah.
It's not just Shrek's home. It's like a sanctuary.
For all the fairy tale creatures who don't fit in the kingdom.
Right. He offers them protection, a place to be themselves, without judgment.
It's like his own little society built on acceptance.
Exactly. And that connects to, why people love Shrek so much. He's the ultimate outsider.
Totally comfortable in his own skin.
Yeah. And that's incredibly appealing, in a world that tells us we should conform.
For sure. So we've got the mythological hero angle, but the podcast also brings in existentialism.
Yeah, they get deep. Specifically, they talk about Sartre, the whole idea that we create our own essence through our actions.
Okay, remind me how that works again.
So basically, it means we're not defined by, what other people think we should be. We define ourselves through what we do, our choices.
Got it. So how does Shrek fit into that? He's an ogre, right? Isn't he kind of stuck being an ogre?
Well, the podcast says that Shrek doesn't care what people think an ogre should be. He's not trying to fit into those expectations.
Interesting.
Yeah. He defines himself through his actions, his choices, his relationships. He's like the ultimate self-made being.
Okay, that's actually pretty deep for an ogre who lives in a swamp.
I know, right? But wait, there's more. This podcast, it goes even further.
Further? Where else could they possibly go with this?
Religious symbolism.
Whoa, hold on. Shrek and religion.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around it myself.
So are they saying Shrek is like a religious figure?
Kind of. They draw parallels between Shrek's journey and those transformative journeys in religious stories.
Give me an example.
They compare his transformation from a solitary ogre to, say, Buddha's enlightenment.
Okay, I see where they're going with that. It's about revealing the true nature of something, right?
Yeah, dispelling misconceptions. In Shrek's case, it's misconceptions about ogres.
Like maybe ogres aren't all bad.
Exactly.
Interesting. So are they just looking at Shrek's personal journey, or do they analyze the swamp too?
Oh, they analyze everything. They even break down the swamp.
Really? What do they say about the swamp?
They describe it as a symbol of, primordial chaos. This raw, undefined space where Shrek, confronts challenges.
And ultimately achieves self-realization.
Exactly.
So the swamp isn't just a random setting. It's like this symbolic space that's crucial to Shrek's, well, divine journey, I guess you could say.
I know, right? It's pretty mind-blowing. But I do have a question. How does all this connect to, Shrek's place in today's world? How does a fairy tale ogre become this symbol of deeper meaning,
That's where it gets even more interesting. That's where the whole idea of Shrek as a deity starts to take shape. They suggest that Shrek's popularity isn't just because he's funny or the fairy tale setting. It's about what he represents.
Which is?
A rejection of those traditional ideas, about beauty and conformity.
Yeah. It's interesting because he's an ogre. Ogres are supposed to be these scary monsters, right?
Right.
But Shrek is the one who's actually comfortable with himself.
Totally.
He's not trying to be anything. He's not. And I think that really resonates with people, especially today.
Yeah, I think you're right. The podcast talks about how we're kind of questioning those old ideas of beauty and success, like what we're supposed to look like or achieve.
Right.
And we're looking for role models who are relatable,
That have flaws.
Exactly. Who are comfortable in their own skin, even if it's green and a little ogreish.
So Shrek He's like the anti-Prince Charming.
Yeah, he's not perfect.
But he's authentic.
Hmm.
And maybe that's even more heroic in a way.
That's a great point. The podcast actually argues that Shrek challenges the whole idea of traditional heroism.
Yeah, because he's not that flawless knight in shining armor.
Right, he's not. He makes mistakes.
Gets angry.
Frustrated, just like us.
But he learns and grows throughout his journey.
And that makes him even more inspiring, I think.
It's like he's giving us permission to embrace our own imperfections and still, strive for something more.
Yeah. To be better.
Yeah, that's powerful, especially for anyone who's ever felt like they don't fit in.
And the podcast suggests that this reflects like a bigger cultural shift.
Oh, how's that?
Like a move away from worshiping those unattainable ideals,
Like perfect beauty, perfect bodies.
Exactly, towards something more grounded, more human.
Okay, but how does this all tie back to the idea of Shrek as a deity?
Right.
Like, how do we go from embracing imperfections to deity status?
Well, I mean, they're not saying we should, like, literally worship Shrek, of course.
Right.
But they argue that he represents a new kind of deity, one that's more accessible.
More relatable.
Yes, exactly. Than those distant, all-powerful figures, the ones we see in traditional religions.
So it's more about the values he represents, the ideas he embodies.
Right, exactly. It's about seeing the divine in the everyday, finding the extraordinary in the ordinary. And Shrek, with his swamp and his ogreness, he kind of becomes a symbol of that.
Oh, I see. It's like he's a reminder that you don't need to conform to some external standard, right?
Yeah, to find meaning and purpose in your life.
Wow, that's pretty profound. It's like we're taking everything we thought we knew about Shrek and just flipping it.
I know, right?
Yeah.
It's challenging, but that's what makes this deep dive so exciting. It makes us think differently, see things in a new light. And the podcast, it really makes a strong case for Shrek as a symbol of something bigger.
So they're basically saying that Shrek represents like a shift in how we understand divinity itself.
Exactly. They're saying it's a move away from those traditional hierarchical ideas of the divine, right? Towards something more inclusive.
More relatable.
More human-centered. And they argue that this really resonates with people today,
Yeah.
People who are questioning those traditional power structures and looking for new sources of meaning and inspiration.
It's pretty amazing to think that a silly ogre could spark these kinds of conversations about, spirituality and the divine.
I know, right?
So what's the podcast's final conclusion about Shrek? Do they actually call him a deity?
Not literally, no. But they do say he embodies a kind of democratized divinity, where that potential for greatness and transformation, it's within everyone.
Regardless of your appearance, background, social status.
Exactly.
It's like Shrek is saying, hey, you don't need a fancy title or a royal lineage to be worthy of love, acceptance, even reverence.
Exactly. And they point out how relevant that is in today's world where we're constantly being judged and categorized.
So Shrek is more than just an ogre. He's like a reflection of how we're evolving, how our values are changing, how we're understanding our place in the universe. It's pretty mind-blowing.
I know. And the podcast leaves us with this really thought-provoking question. Like, if we accept this idea of Shrek, right, as a symbol of this new democratized form of divinity, what does that say about how we find meaning and inspiration in the stories we tell? What does it say about the characters we embrace?
That's a really great question to sit with for a minute. It makes you realize that the stories we consume, they aren't just entertainment. They're reflections of who we are and what we believe in.
Absolutely. And maybe those seemingly lighthearted stories are actually shaping our values and beliefs in ways we don't even realize.
Okay, so we've explored this wild idea, right, of Shrek as a modern deity, a symbol of something, well, bigger than just a funny ogre. It's a lot to process, but I'm kind of convinced.
I know, right? It's amazing how the seemingly simple character can spark such a deep conversation, about heroism, divinity, even our own personal journeys.
So before we wrap up this deep dive, let's bring it all together. What's the big takeaway here? What does this podcast really want us to understand about Shrek and his place in our culture,
I think the key message is that Shrek represents a real shift. A shift in how we view things.
Yeah.
Heroism, divinity, even ourselves.
Yeah.
He's not your typical hero. He's flawed. He's relatable. He challenges all those norms and he embraces his uniqueness.
Right. And in doing so, he kind of reflects our own desire for authenticity, for acceptance, for a more inclusive understanding of what it means to be to be great, you know?
Yeah, exactly. It's like he's saying it's okay to be yourself, warts and all,
Yeah.
to find your own path, even if it doesn't, fit that traditional fairy tale mold.
Right. You don't need a fairy godmother or a magic sword
Right.
to be worthy of love and acceptance.
The podcast argues that Shrek's enduring popularity. It shows how hungry we are for stories that reflect our own complexities and challenges, stories that celebrate the underdog, the outsider.
The ones who don't fit in.
Right. The stories that remind us that true strength comes from embracing our vulnerabilities, our imperfections.
And that it's okay to find inspiration in unexpected places, even in a grumpy swamp-dwelling ogre.
Absolutely. Shrek's story reminds us that the divine, the heroic, the extraordinary, it's not, confined to some distant realm. It's not reserved for a select few. It's all around us.
In the everyday moments.
In the people we encounter, the challenges we face, the choices we make.
So as we wade out of this swamp of ideas, what's the one thought you want to leave our listeners with?
Remember that question the podcast posed at the end? Like, if we accept this idea of Shrek as a symbol of this new democratized form of divinity, what does that say about how we find meaning and inspiration in the stories we tell?
Yeah. What stories resonate with us?
What characters inspire us, and what does that say about our own search for meaning and purpose?
That's a really great point to end on. It reminds us that the stories we consume, they're more than just entertainment. They're reflections of our values, our beliefs, our aspirations. So choose your stories wisely. And maybe even find a little bit of the divine in the most unexpected places. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep finding the extraordinary in the ordinary.